3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning to you, Boris Johnson, to give evidence at the UK COVID inquiry today. That will get underway shortly. We're not taking it live, but we will be keeping a very, very close eye on proceedings and bringing you any developments as and when they occur. What we will not be doing is taking editorial lines being punted at Boris Johnson's request by right-wing newspapers this morning and allowing the most egregious liar ever to hold the highest office in the land to somehow preempt the investigations of the inquiry. I read one article that said, friends say he will be concentrating on policy, not personality. And you think, is there anybody in the entire editorial structure at Rupert Murdoch's empire prepared simply to point out he'll be bloody well doing what the inquiry tell him to do, regardless of what his friends may say or whatever client journalists may recycle on his behalf? Is there a German word for being shocked but not surprised? Is there a way to describe it? You sort of think you've reached saturation points at how awful this man is and how completely he's polluted public discourse and politics in this country. And then up he pops again from a position of complete and abject disgrace, considered to be too awful even for the awful cabinet that he appointed. And up he pops again now, calling in favours from the Telegraph, the Times, the Sun, and various useful idiots in broadcast media to allow him to attempt to manipulate the coverage of something that hasn't even happened yet. It is, frankly, extraordinary and yet at the same time so utterly and ploddingly predictable. I retain the ability, it turns out, to be shocked, even as I am not remotely surprised. COVID inquiry should look at harms of lockdowns. Front page of the Daily Telegraph. COVID inquiry should look at how many deaths Boris Johnson is personally responsible for. And it hopefully will. So we'll be keeping an eye on that story. And it has now begun to unfold. I'd like to see him try some of his usual shenanigans with Hugo Keith KC. It may be a rather enjoyable spectacle for as long as you can remember that we're actually talking about decisions and incompetences that led to all manner of suffering, up to and including death, avoidable and unnecessary death. 6 minutes after 10 is the time. Right, something really weird happened on the programme yesterday. And you don't see this, I don't think, although, remember, you can actually watch the show now in its entirety on YouTube, which is a curious addendum to the business as usual. But I don't know if you could tell if you watched it yesterday that I was exchanging expressions with the producer of the programme because I was reassuring you that there's no way this new £38,700 threshold for bringing a spouse into the country or having a spouse in the country, there's no way, I said to you, that it could possibly be retrospective. And the producer, who is a more cynical soul than me, was raising her eyebrows at me and sort of pursing her lips and shaking her head as if to say, I wouldn't be surprised, I wouldn't put it past them. And me, James O-Brexit, the sworn enemy of all things post-Brexit Tory, the sworn enemy of all the client journalism, all the appalling politics, all the promotion and inflation of epic incompetence and dishonesty. I was going, no, they wouldn't be that awful. And I was actually reassuring you that if you are currently together with a joint income of less than £38,700, if, for example, you're managing to raise a family with one of you staying at home to look after the children and one of you earning £38,500 a year, I reassured you yesterday that you would be fine. And I'm really sorry, I was wrong. It has been confirmed subsequently, and I bring you this news, if you haven't heard it already, with a genuinely heavy heart. It is one of those mornings where I can't quite believe what has happened to my country. And once again, I find myself stunned that I am contemplating catastrophe inflicted on my country, catastrophe and callousness inflicted on my country by people who claim to be patriotic. Never have the words of Dr. Johnson on that issue rung more true. The last refuge of a scoundrel, he called it, and I never understood what he meant as a kid. I always thought, what's he on about? Patriotism's a good thing. It's good to be patriotic. But people who trumpet their patriotism and use it as a camouflage for their catastrophic conduct and their callousness, they are scoundrels. They are scumbags, to use a more modern phrase. And people claiming to be patriots, whether it's Nigel Farage with his grubby saloon bar xenophobia, or whether it's Boris Johnson with his self-serving, narcissistic, instant gratification, they are the people responsible for bringing our country close to its knees. And it's Rishi Sunak's turn this week to do something that I consider to be profoundly un-British, to do something that I consider to be oddly, and I think that Alicia Kearns used this word last night with Andrew Marr, it's profoundly unconservative. And I speak, when I say that, of an ideology that recognises aspiration and that recognises the importance of family. It might not be something that you agree with. I certainly don't join in the demonisation of single parents in the way that many right-wingers do. But I do recognise, just from my own personal experience, the wealth that family can deliver, the non-financial wealth. I read a great interview with Rosamund Pike, who's in a wonderful new film called Saltburn. And she was talking a little bit about privilege. It's an interview in GQ. It's another great article in GQ. They've got Martin Freeman, Ralph Ineson and Stephen Merchant together to talk about the last ever Office. You remember the Christmas special when Dawn and what's Martin Freeman's character called? Tim. When Dawn and Tim finally get it together. It's just a beautiful, one of the best episodes of television ever seen. And GQ's got a wonderful article about it. And it led me to this Rosamund Pike interview. And she talks about privilege. And one of the things she said is, I was privileged. I had love. You can get love from one parent or two parents or four parents, whatever it may be. But love, it's there. Love is a privilege. And so family is important. And it used to be something that Conservatives cared about. And yet now they are introducing policies designed to appease racists that will tear families apart. I think they will tear families apart, because the first thing we must do together is look at what the current situation is and what the detail may be. And how interesting is it that even we're not entirely sure, unless you've actually had to live it or jump through the hoops or whatever it may be, even we're not entirely sure what the current rules are. So if you have a foreign partner, and if your household does not earn £38,700, or if, of course, you are a foreign partner who does not have indefinite leave to remain, then you could be thrown out of the country next time your visa comes up for renewal. I can't believe I'm saying these words. This isn't who we are, is it? I'm going to have to say it again. If your partner is foreign, or if you are foreign with a British partner, then if you don't earn £38,700 a year, which is more than the national average for an individual, not for a household, to be fair, but if your household doesn't earn more than £38,700 a year, then when your visa comes up for renewal, you could be thrown out of the country. So that politicians who will almost certainly not be in power when the figures come in can claim that the reduction in overall numbers of net migration are somehow good news. It doesn't even address, of course, the people coming here. It simply seeks to throw people out so you can subtract them from the overall total of people coming in and deliver a net migration figure that is, they hope, 300,000 humans lower than the one that they delivered after 13 and a half years. Actually, it's not quite right, is it, given the year that the stats refer to? 12 years in power. I'm sorry, I genuinely wasn't expecting to be overtaken by emotion this morning, partly because we covered it yesterday, partly because I've been a little bit distracted by limbering up for Boris Johnson's evidence, which is underway now with an apology not worth the chip paper that it's printed on, and partly because the full impact of what I've just said to you hadn't hit me until I actually said it out loud. Brits, this is how the Independent newspaper reports it, Brits could see their foreign partners told to leave the country the next time their visa comes up for renewal if their household does not earn £38,700, number 10 said. They choose at The Independent to describe it thus: new laws designed to slash the number of migrants by 300,000 a year risk splitting up families already living in the UK. This is joint income. This is for people already here. If it's someone coming here, then the host partner, as it were, needs to be earning that independently. That needs to be single income. So it's a little bit of confusion there, but I promise you this is the bottom line. This is the final say, if you like. This is currently definitive. £38,700 joint income. When you come to renew your visa, if you're below that figure, you risk being thrown out of the country. And, you know, they talk about case-by-case bases. They talk about having to put your case forward to get some sort of exemption from the overall rule. But this, I think, puts us in an almost unique position as a civilized, wealthy nation. Indeed, the spokeswoman Madeleine Sumption, the director of the Migration Observatory at the University of Oxford, said that this makes the UK an outlier among Western nations. People living here, this is a punishment for British people earning less than £38,700 a year. The punishment is this: your husband can't stay, your wife can't stay. I'm really sorry, this doesn't happen to me very often. I can't actually believe what I'm telling you this morning. Some days you really can't see the wood for the trees, can you? James Cleverly, who often speaks movingly of his mother's arrival in this country to train as a midwife, responsible for this policy. I don't want to ask you this question, actually, but I'm going to have to. This affects you, right? 0345 6060 973. This affects you. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And listen, let's not get immediately entrenched in emotion. The idea that you could have a joint income of less than £20,000 and, just to coin a phrase or to indulge a little cliche, you could then avail yourself of all the benefits of living in Britain. I don't just mean obvious state benefits. I can see why some people would be uncomfortable with that. You should, of course, be considerably more uncomfortable with the epic wealth, the untracked wealth and often untaxed wealth of the kind of people that promote Boris Johnson's cause at every opportunity. But I can see how we as a nation, you could make a strong case for saying we can't afford to support people who weren't born here or aren't from here. When a household income, you're coming in to join a household with an income below £20,000. So the leap from 18,000 to 38,700, it may be the size of the leap that is the problem rather than the necessity of some sort of leap. But we are where we are. I'm only going to say this once more because I'm getting quite a lot of texts. The people we're talking about are the people that already live here. And the joint income you will have in order to stay is $38,700. If your partner doesn't currently live here and you want to bring him or her here, then that will need to be your independent income, a single income of $38,700. But if you're applying for a visa, reapplying for a visa, then that figure will be household income rather than independent income. So if you want to bring a spouse to the UK, you will have to earn £38,700, a significant increase on the current figure. We talked to some people in that position yesterday, but if you are already in the UK as a non-Brit who doesn't have indefinite leave to remain, then the household will need to earn £38,700. I want to make that clear because I understand the confusion. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Is this you? That's the first question I've got. Is this you? Tell me about you. Tell me about your family. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your income, if you don't mind. I don't want to be rude or nosy, but to work out whether this is as evil, and I use that word rarely, to work out whether this is as evil as it appears, we need to know a little bit more detail. Maybe it's reasonable. I can't pretend that I get by on £38,700 a year. If you earn less than that, maybe it's perfectly reasonable that you are only allowed to pick your partner from a pool of people that were either born here or have indefinite leave to remain here. Unlike anybody earning £38,701, if you fall in love with somebody born overseas, you can't be together for the sake of 50p. You can't be with the person that you fell in love with on holiday. Yesterday we heard from a chap who'd fallen in love with a Brazilian, a chap who'd fallen in love with a Malaysian, a chap who, and this of course will apply to Europe as well. You might have fallen in love with a Frenchman, but you earn £38,699 a year, so he can't come and join you in this country. But the people I'm most interested in this morning are the people who are already here. I can't quite believe what we're seeing. And yesterday, we didn't really find anyone who thought it was a good idea. I don't include Billy the Bulldog avatars on social media, Billy Bunch of Numbers. I don't include little Tommy Ten Names fans who are just sort of desperately begging for attention by pretending to be hard on social media. I mean real people with real blood in their veins who are cheering this. They don't really seem to exist, but maybe I've just managed to detoxify my feed so completely that I just don't see it anymore. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. It's 20 past 10. 23 minutes after 10. I am a mental health first aider at work. I've just had to spend the past 2 hours trying to help calm a colleague that has had multiple panic attacks caused by worry about this disgusting evil policy. He has a partner and a newborn and is terrified of what the future holds. I want to be able to tell him that it will be okay, but I can't. This is performative cruelty at its absolute worst. Is it? Is it just incompetence? Have they cobbled together a policy without really thinking it through? I hate the fact that I was wrong yesterday. Not because I hate being wrong, but because I hate what being right means. It means that couples currently together in this country, I don't think you can deport someone with children. But then again, that first thing they do is talk about the Human Rights Act being abolished, although they seem to be stepping back from that at the moment. I think this is one of the darkest days we've ever shared together. The problem when populism and policy collide is that populism involves demonising immigrants, demonising foreigners, demonising the other. The most important phrase we have stumbled across on this programme in the context of immigration is "I didn't mean you." It's such a powerful phrase. It's such a powerful illustration of how it all works. I didn't mean you. Because all of the people who think that they want more control or take back our borders or send them back where they came from, they generally, and there will be exceptions to this, they generally don't mean the people that they actually know and encounter. Well, I don't mean my doctor. I don't mean the nurses. I don't mean the care home workers looking after my mum. I don't mean my accountant. I don't mean the parents of my children's friends at primary school. I don't mean you. I don't mean you. So populism takes a hold upon the body politic, and politicians try to feed the populism with politics. And politics means policy. And a policy designed to address populism, it does mean you. It does mean all of the people that all of the people calling for tougher immigration rules claim it doesn't. It means you. That's why today is such a horrible day. Robin's in Perth. Robin, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Nice
Hello.
to speak to you.
Likewise.
Sorry it has to be under these circumstances.
Yes, so am I.
I've been overseas for many, many years. Came back into the country 18 months ago. My wife arrived in July, about a month after I was here. We had to fight tooth and nail to get her application approved. It took almost probably the thick end of a year
Right.
to get it done. My wife's Malaysian, by the way.
Okay.
We've got a daughter who's just got herself into school, and now we find that she may or may not be able to stay.
What's your household income, if you don't mind me asking?
At this moment, I'm making about 32, roughly, give or take a few hundred here and there.
And
But
is that's keeping the family's head above water, is it, if you don't mind me asking?
we survive.
Yeah.
We don't. We're not eating out every night and going on fancy holidays or going to the pub.
No, but you're not going down the
survive.
food bank either, I hope.
No. We're okay.
Yeah,
we're
that's
all
what I
right.
mean. And of course, what you've reminded us of further is the extra injustice of geography, because of course the cost of living in some parts of the United Kingdom is considerably lower and therefore higher than it is in other parts of the United Kingdom, and yet the 38.7 threshold is going to be sort of brutally applied to everywhere on these islands. What hoops do you have to jump through at the moment? Were you aware that you needed to be earning, I think, in excess of £18,000 in order for your wife to come here in the first place? You've jumped through all those hoops.
We've done all that. We had a lawyer. We employed a lawyer to help us out, and got that done.
So that was
£18,600
£18,600 for your wife to join you here. You had to show that you were earning more than £18,600.
Yeah, I came here from China, so I before we moved, we looked into everything and got it all sorted out. So when I secured a job here, the salary was suitable and over the 18,000 limit without any problem.
Yeah.
So we came back. As I say, my daughter's British. We got her into school. She's settled here. Not long after she arrived, she had a slight medical issue, which meant that my wife couldn't go back to Malaysia. So we're now on the 10-year route. Are we going to get to 10 years? Are we going to get to 5 years?
So a 10-year route in order for her to get indefinite leave to remain.
Yeah.
So that's been
right, yeah.
so because she had to leave the country to deal with a family medical issue back in Malaysia.
No, here. My daughter was ill.
Oh, okay.
So instead of going home after 6 months, my wife stayed on.
Oh, I see what you
to
mean.
take care of, because I was working full time. I can't take care of her. So obviously with that and one thing and another,
And do you pay for your wife's health? Does she pay the health surcharge?
she's done that.
How much is that?
That was about 1,800.
And how much have you paid lawyers? How much have you paid lawyers?
Thick end of 15,000.
Shh, nearly swore.
And now we find out we get hit with this. My wife's sitting here this morning just about in tears.
I bet she is, and I wish I could say something. I mean, all I think is that when the full detail of this emerges, they will have to step back from implementing it. But I said that yesterday, and the producer pursed her lips at me, and she was right and I was wrong. What do you think? What do you think? We're British. This isn't really what we think our country stands for and what it does. Do you think that the current iteration of the Conservative Party, if it is in a position to do so, would push ahead with this sort of policy, a family-splitting policy?
The way they're going, it wouldn't surprise me, because I don't think they care.
So who is supposed to be pleased about this? Who is supposed to be cheering this?
All the ones who jump up and down saying no more immigrants.
Well, I don't know that even they do, actually, want this. This isn't what we meant. I didn't mean you. Robin, thank you, and I'm sorry, and my love to your wife. Well, the man responsible for introducing this mode of politics to the United Kingdom, for making the truth worthless, and for seeing the acceleration of incompetence into the highest offices in the land is currently being held to a form of account at the COVID inquiry. Charlotte Lynch has been watching events there with Boris Johnson, and she will bring us up to date shortly. But first, we have the headlines with Thomas Watts. 10:34 is the time. I can tell you exactly what mode Boris Johnson is in. He's in, I'm sorry, matron mode. I'm sorry I ate all the cake, matron. His hair is ridiculous. Listen, I'm not a particularly well-turned-out human being, but if I'm appearing before a judge or an inquiry or even an employer, then I would not turn up looking like a dirty mop. Seems to be sharing Michael Fabricant's hair at the moment, albeit that he's got the slightly scruffier version, and he's doing that fake contrition face, the serious face. He's been doing that face since he was 8 or 9 years old. and he was caught, I don't know, scrumping bloody apples or something. He's been doing that face. I know that face. Everyone who went to a school like mine and gets into trouble a lot learns that face. Some of us grow out of it. But not Boris Johnson. He's doing that for, yes, matron, yes, sir, sorry, sir, no, sir, well, no, absolutely not, sir. And then he comes out and he closes the door of the headmaster's study behind him and he goes to his mates, yeah, come on, lads, hey. That's what he's doing. That's what he does. That's who he is. And I don't know. I mean, you know, getting him out of Downing Street was probably the best it's ever going to get when it comes to him facing consequences of his actions. So I'm not hugely optimistic about the COVID inquiry, but I haven't been watching it as closely as Charlotte Lynch has, who has just joined me to talk us through the opening salvos.
And there was that apology that we were expecting. It was reported in the papers across the weekend. And Baroness Heather Hallett, who is chairing the inquiry, actually opened with a warning. She was actually less than pleased, it seemed, that details had already been briefed to the papers over the course of the weekend.
Not just, sorry, Charlotte, I will give you plenty of room to do, but it's not just briefed to the papers. It's inhaled. It's French kissed. It's caressed by the papers and reproduced verbatim as if this is somehow valid contribution to an inquiry that hasn't even sat down to listen to him yet. Journalists, editors at the Times, editors at the Telegraph, editors at the Sun and the Daily Mail taking dictation from Boris Johnson about what his evidence is likely to contain and what his evidence is likely to address. Whereas they all know that the British public's hopes of justice and truth rely upon Johnson dancing to the inquiry's tune, not somehow enlisting right-wing media to get the inquiry to dance to his tune. I mean, one article in the Telegraph today that, frankly, the man responsible for writing it should have demanded that his name be taken off it. Absolutely extraordinary client journalism on a level that we've never had the misfortune of witnessing before. This COVID inquiry, writes someone called Philip Johnston, has already made up its mind on who to blame. Boris, first name. He was the bloody Prime Minister. All the buck stopped with him. But the right-wing newspapers already mounting sort of rearguard, retrospective defences. I'll be quiet now and let Charlotte Lynch give you an actual report.
It's absolutely okay, James. But, I mean, Heather Hallett, warned against doing that because, of course, the whole purpose of this is for families who suffered so much pain and loss during COVID to understand why certain decisions were made. And she expressed that it was important for these details to be heard within the space of the inquiry and not to be leaked beforehand. There was some disruption too before he gave that apology, but before he did, it appeared that there was some sort of protest just beforehand. We'll play you a little bit of what we could see and hear.
Sit down, please. Please stop.
COVID victims.
Please sit down. Please sit down, or I'm afraid you'll have to leave the hearing room. I'm sorry, if you don't sit down, I'm going to ask the ushers to get you to leave. Right, ushers, please, could you ask them to leave?
Now, they were kept off the cameras, but 4 people, we understand, were removed from the hearing room after standing up in almost silent protest as Boris Johnson began to give that apology to victims. We don't know yet. Okay. Nobody's kind of claimed responsibility. But we know that the COVID-19 bereaved families for Justice group weren't able to sit in the hearing room. They were staging some protests outside ahead of his arrival, but he arrived about 3 hours early to avoid those. So I don't think it was bereaved families.
He did what?
He arrived 3 hours early.
To avoid the families, the bereaved families.
I can't say that for certain, but it meant that yes, he avoided the protest.
We can all say he arrived 3 hours early and therefore avoided the families who had gathered to express their unhappiness about his leadership during a period in which they lost their family members.
Yeah, that's correct.
On we go.
Here is the apology that he was then able to give to the inquiry.
Could I say, by your leave, that I understand the feelings of these victims and their families, and I am deeply sorry for the pain and the loss and the suffering of those victims and their families. And grateful though I am to the hundreds of thousands of healthcare workers and many other public servants and people in all walks of life who helped to protect our country throughout a dreadful pandemic, I do hope that this inquiry will help to get the answers to the very difficult questions that those victims and those families are rightly asking.
Now, questioning by Hugo Keith KC, the chief counsel to the inquiry, began with him asking why thousands of Mr Johnson's WhatsApps are missing. He asked about the disclosure of these documents, WhatsApps, emails. Mr Johnson said, "I've done my best to give everything of relevance that I can." He asked, has this always been your position? He insisted it was yes. Now, a WhatsApp exchange between Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, and Martin Reynolds was then shown to the inquiry, where Simon Case said the PM is mad if he doesn't think his WhatsApps will become public via the COVID inquiry. But he was clearly not in the mood for that discussion tonight. This was a few days after he had ordered the inquiry. He'd ordered that it was going to take place. It turned to the fact that around 5,000 WhatsApp messages weren't accessible. He said he didn't know the reason why that was. It was put to him, is it because the phone had been erased? There was a factory reset, and he said he didn't even know what a factory reset was.
So he's talking about his own phone.
Yes, yeah. And he said he hadn't heard of a factory reset. Hugo Keith had to explain it to him. But he insisted that he didn't know.
Because he had the nuclear codes
He insisted
for a period
yeah.
of three years or so. But he doesn't know how to operate a mobile phone.
Yeah, there we go. He doesn't know what a factory reset is. Now, Hugo Keith then reeled off a series of decisions. In fact, we'll let you hear it, and asked if Mr Johnson took personal responsibility for each of those.
Do you take responsibility for whatever my lady makes of the speed of the government's response in January, February, March of 2020?
Of course.
And the way in which the various moving parts of the government, the advisory committees, the departments, the agencies and so on responded?
Of course.
Do you take responsibility for the lockdown decisions, whichever way they went, and their timeliness, whatever my lady makes of them? The manner in which patients were discharged from hospitals into the care sector?
Of course.
The explosion of the virus within the residential care sector?
Yes.
The general speed at which the restrictions were eased?
Yes.
The Eat Out to Help Out scheme?
And he said yes and nodded to all of those. Now, in a section of his witness statement, he also says he said he accepts personal responsibility, unquestionably made mistakes. But of course, he's been preparing to face this inquiry for months. And when he was questioned on exactly what those were, Hugo Keith said, "What exactly are you apologising for?" He didn't seem to have an answer. He almost just said, "I'd actually find it easier if you just ask the questions and then I can answer them." It seems like he will accept anything almost that is put to him by the inquiry. As I say, they're accepting the responsibility for all the decisions that were made. But there has been early on, he seemed to dispute evidence that has been placed before the inquiry, which shows that the UK in the Western world did have one of the worst death tolls.
Almost all other Western European countries had a lower level of excess death.
I've seen.
Italy was tragically in a worse position than the United Kingdom.
Well, I don't wish to contradict you, Mr. Keith, but the evidence, the ONS data I saw put us, I think, about 16th or 19th in a table of 33.
In Western Europe, we were one of the worst off, if not the second worst off. You must have long reflected since that time why that was so. Why do you think that we had the rate of excess deaths in this country that we did ultimately have?
As I say, I think that the statistics vary, and I think that every country struggled with a new pandemic, and I think the UK, from the evidence that I have seen, was well down the European table and obviously even further down the world table. If I had to answer why I think we faced particular headwinds, I would say it was, irrespective of government action, we have an elderly population, extremely elderly population. We do suffer, sadly, from lots of COVID-related comorbidities, and we are a very, very densely populated country, the second most densely populated country in Europe, and that did not help.
Well, when he was asked if he believed his decision-making led to more deaths, he said, I can't give you the answer to that question. I can see now they're just getting into the first lockdown, the decisions that were made around that. So we'll keep an ear across it and, of course, keep updating you as and when.
Petulant, I think, is possibly the word there. Denying the statistics that are being presented by the KC. And, I mean, glossing over these WhatsApps. These... I mean, Sunak's not got his either, has he, if I understand it correctly? So these are most likely to be... And Simon Case is too poorly to give evidence, the Cabinet Secretary. Mm-hmm. We wish him a speedy recovery. So the three people at the centre, really, of the communications have either lost their messages to each other or been exempted for now, as far as we know, from giving any evidence at all on account of unspecified illness.
A significant proportion of them, yeah.
Okay. Are there any dogs eating homework in the picture at the moment? Are you aware of that?
It's not come up in evidence yet. No,
nothing's yet come up in evidence. How can a Prime Minister not know where 5,000 WhatsApp messages have gone, covering a period of time during which he was making the single most important decisions of his premiership? And how can a man entrusted with the nuclear codes even claim with a straight face not to know what a factory reset is on his mobile phone? Thank you, Charlotte. We will... no doubt hear a little bit more from you a lot more from you in the course of the day. PMQ's coming up at 12 o'clock today. I feel like the ambassador in that Ferrero Rocher advert. With all this news, you are really spoiling us. 10 minutes to 11 is the time. Janet writes very powerfully, 38,000 income stipulation for families with a foreign spouse is calculated with net migration statistics in mind. If the foreign spouse leaves the country, so will the whole family, UK citizens included, 3, 4 or 5 for the price of 1. Some of the electorate will love this. Unfortunately, there is still a demographic who dislikes people who marry foreigners, particularly of another race, and who would like to see British people they regard as race traitors punished. But that, I mean, if you're right, Janet, that would include James Cleverly's dad. Although you add particularly if they are women. Being married to an East Asian, I have experienced this hostility myself very openly. I think this plan is calculated and deliberate in its cruelty. I still can't, and I'm sorry. I still cling to the hope that it's some sort of mistake, or that when push comes to shove, the number of people who will become eligible for removal, dreadful and unbearable though that is, will not actually be removed. I'm going to warn you now, I'm going to be talking about Boris Johnson in the next hour, and I haven't currently got a phone-in question, which raises the very real possibility of me talking uninterrupted until PMQ starts at 11:55, because he is going through the playbook like a hot knife through butter. All of the things I've spent years explaining to you, he is now providing absolutely incontrovertible evidence of his relationship with the truth, his contempt for scrutiny or accountability, his absolutely deep-rooted belief that the rules the rest of us live by should somehow not apply to him, something first pointed out publicly by his teachers at Eton. And it's all there. And the lies about his WhatsApps. He knows because how many times have I said to you, unless you can cut him open and prove that he's lying, he will say things that are objectively and absurdly untrue. I've got no idea where 5,000 WhatsApp messages went, and I don't know what a factory reset is. I didn't hit her. She ran into my fist. Would be the equivalent of that from schoolboy excuses. 10:53 is the time. Sam's in Stratford to take us back to this horrible migration story, which is so horrible, in fact, I can't quite believe it. Sam, what made you pick up the phone?
Thank you very much, James. This is my first time calling LBC. I do listen to you a lot because I spend a lot of time in the traffic, so I listen to the radio due to the nature of my work. So basically, my wife is on a spouse visa. We've got 2 kids here, a girl of 3 and a boy, 6 months.
Yeah.
So at the moment, she's not working. I've asked her to stay at home because arranging childcare is just another issue. So basically, she would be due for renewal, I think, next year, December. Yeah. I'm working full time. I'm earning just a little bit shy of 35 grand. Yeah. 34,000 some hundreds I'm earning. Yeah. But our total household income is not up to
38,700.
Yeah. So it's just basically leaving me in like kind of a limbo. I was shocked. I did listen to some of your program yesterday, but I didn't think it applied to those that are currently here.
Nor did I.
But it appears so. So I don't know. I'm just a little bit confused this morning, just after listening to you.
Well, I mean, don't shoot the messenger. I know you're not minded to do that, and I hope that this turns out to be better news for families like yours than it currently is. But this is the Politics and Whitehall editor at The Independent putting these questions specifically to Downing Street and being told that that they will apply. That there will be, when your visa comes up for renewal, if your household does not earn £38,700, then they will be entitled to tell your partner to leave the country. It doesn't mean they will.
Yeah, I understand a little bit, because if that should happen, I hope not. But
so do I.
The two kids are British, which means I can't carry on working full time. And the government, on one hand, they asking everyone to go back into employment.
So your wife might leave, the kids would stay. You'd give up your work to look after the children and sign on.
That's an option.
Who does that help?
No, I just don't get it.
You're getting the feeling they haven't thought this through, Sam.
I tell you what, I'm a bit confused at the moment. I just need to process it.
Yes, of course.
I haven't done. I would admit I haven't done any research on it at all. I haven't read it. I'm only listening to LBC.
I'm being very careful, and to be honest, I erred on the side of optimism yesterday when I said I can't quite believe this would apply to people already here when either retrospectively or when visas come up for renewal. But the specific question was asked of Downing Street. We asked it yesterday and got a sort of a mealy-mouthed knockback, just to sort of, we haven't really... In fact, between you and me, Sam, when we asked the Home Office this question yesterday, we very much got the impression they didn't know the answer. So then the Independent went to Downing Street, and they've obviously had to provide the technical answer. So technically, yes, these people could become eligible for removal. I still don't think they will, but, I'm a naive soul and very trusting.
Well, I'm at the moment, I'm even having to process. I'm not going to wait for them. It's either when I get home and discuss with my wife to see if she can get back and get some part time just to top up.
Just to get over the 38,700 limit, and that's for the sake of a quid. You can stay. Your family can stay here, and if you fail to find that quid to push you from £38,699 to £38,700, you can stay. Just seems odd, doesn't it? I know that thresholds always have that in built into them, but it does seem odd. Sam, take care. As I say, I mean, my instincts tell me, my patriotic instincts tell me that it won't come to that, but technically, I think, as things stand, it could. James, Tom here. I work as a police officer. After 4 years' service, I'm on £33,900. I'm due to get married in February to my long-term Tunisian partner. In my line of work, I'm not allowed to do a second job. How am I going to tell my partner that we will need to wait a further 3 years before my pay grade goes up? Listen, in the short term, Tom, I don't think you're going to have to. If you're getting married in February, just crack on and get it all done. And then face this problem or jump off this cliff when the visa renewal comes around, because the new rules are not going to kick in by February. There's some confusion about when they are going to kick in, but I'd bet a few quid on you being all right for now and then facing problems when visa renewal comes around, by which point your new partner would just need to be doing something to bring in £5,000 a year. Whether they're intending to work when they come here, I don't know. But I'm just giving you breathing room. The problem is we're already normalising this policy. We're already talking about ways around, as if that's the new bedrock. That's the new status quo. That's the new state of that's the country we are now. That's the country we are now. That's what we've become. Omar is in Croydon. Omar, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm a software engineer working in the pharmaceutical industry.
Okay.
I'm fortunate enough to be above the threshold in terms of salary. I got my wife to come over last year, so again, we're both very fortunate. But I do have friends who have worked, really hard. They've studied here. They've spent a significant amount of money on their education, and they're now in limbo. And one of my couple friends, who very recently, the wife actually developed a severe health condition which where she had to leave her job, and she's pregnant now as well. So there's absolutely no chance of her working anytime soon. And the husband is, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't qualify
below 38.7
within that threshold. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I have no idea what's going to happen to them, because the husband's actually a British citizen now, and he's been here for so long. They've built a life here together. You know, they're pregnant, and it's just horrible. And just a couple of months ago, actually, the government announced these measures where they banned dependents for undergraduate and master's students, as well as raising the price of the fees for immigration. That would have brought down numbers anyway. Not to say that was
but also these aren't. I guess the fundamental flaw in all of this is that the people that the racist politicians or the race-baiting politicians are talking about when they inflame anti-immigration rhetoric are so sort of non-existent, or such a tiny part of the bigger picture, that none of these policies address the kind of people that Billy Buncher-Numbers on Twitter is being encouraged every day to get so excited about. No one's talking about going after software engineers' poorly pregnant wives. And yet, I guess that when you allow populism to creep into politics, that's what happens. And then, of course, all of the other people who earn more than £38,700, they can marry foreign nationals. Jeremy Hunt can marry a foreign national. Nigel Farage can marry a foreign national. They can 25% of the population, is my rough estimate, are currently allowed to marry whoever they want. Under the new rules, 25% of the population will be allowed to marry whoever they want. It won't matter where they were born. For 75% of the population, the government is now determining who you can and can't marry, who you can and can't live with. As a British citizen, if you fall in love with a foreigner, the British government has decided that if you earn less than £38,700, you can't live together under the same roof in this country. It's 1 minute after 11. So here we are. All right, 5 minutes after 11 is the time. Boris Johnson is giving evidence to the COVID inquiry. Remember, it wasn't his lies about COVID that finally got him slung out by his own party. It was his lies about the appointment to a senior position of a man he knew to be a sex pest, and his subsequent lies about whether or not he knew the man to be a sex pest. Because Johnson lies like the rest of us breathe. I don't have a phone-in question for you at 5 minutes after 11, and I am aware that the temptation to follow events at the COVID inquiry live is probably considerable. We'll try and sort of straddle two stools, as it were, by covering it and talking about it. And I may come up with a question, I may not. I may just wait to see whether you want to ring me and talk about it in a sort of therapeutic way. The anger I feel now towards this man is visceral. For a while I can be funny about it. I've just been on a book tour with my new book, and I do a sort of half decent impression of him. And you can make people laugh about Boris Johnson, particularly at the absurdity of his lies, the segueing effortlessly from there were no parties to, well, there were parties, but I certainly did not know about them, to, well, yeah, there were parties, and, well, I did know about them, but I definitely did not attend any. Oh, no, sorry, folks. That's an inverted pyramid of piffle. And then he gets to, well, yeah, I mean, there were parties, and I was aware of them, and it turns out I did actually attend them, but I had absolutely no idea that they were parties. And that's funny, right? It's somehow absurdly funny. It's almost surreal humour that somebody could lie so blatantly, so egregiously. But it was the Prime Minister doing it in the Parliament. That of course, is what led to him being found in contempt, which led to him resigning as an MP in disgrace, rather than face the punishment that his peers would have handed down to him, a suspension long enough to trigger a recall by-election in Uxbridge and Ruislip, which he would then have lost. That's how shameful he is. That's how despicable he is. That's how depraved he is. Even when he is found out, not with his fingers in the till, when he's found, he's up to his shoulders. He's so deep in the till, his head's in there. It's just his feet poking out of the back of the till. That's just his little feet dangling. He's so deep, and he's been found there, right there, ankle deep in the till. And he wriggles out again and starts pretending that he's done nothing wrong. And to their eternal shame, people like Nadine Dorries and Jacob Rees-Mogg queued up to defend him even as his ankles were poking out the front of the till, because they're incapable of breaking that cultish hold that he has over them for reasons that I think you probably have to have been a cult member to understand. So the lies are of a scale and of a nature that in modern political life I think you can only compare to Donald Trump. I don't think anybody has lied or can lie as casually and as coolly and as completely as Boris Johnson does, except Boris Johnson. We have learned over the last few weeks that his closest colleagues thought he was diabolical. The cabinet secretary that Boris Johnson appointed because he would prove to be, or he was believed to be, a soft touch, has described Boris Johnson as being utterly unfit for the job. The advisor that he brought in as a sort of mastermind, having overseen Brexit, Dominic Cummings, has described Boris Johnson in terms that you would reserve for your worst enemies. These are the people working closest by him. The only person who's had anything vaguely warm to say about him is Matt Hancock, and let me tell you why. They've shaken hands on it. I'd bet my house on some sort of gentleman's... let's rephrase that. I'd bet my house on some sort of charlatan's agreement behind the scenes that they won't slag each other off because everybody else is telling the truth about them. About Johnson and about Hancock. Hancock's uselessness facilitated and enabled by Johnson's uselessness, by Johnson's moral corruption, effectively. And now the lies begin. 5,000 WhatsApp messages. No idea. No idea. Don't know. Technical people. Factory reset. Don't know. Bleep, bleep. And then the classic, the flooding of the zone with so much manure that it's hard to know where to start. 10 minutes after 11 is the time. We may have made mistakes, is one of the latest statements to come out. We may have made mistakes. Turns up 3 hours early so that he doesn't have to walk the gamut of people congregating to remember their lost loved ones and to share their feelings with the man that they consider to be partly responsible for their death. Absolutely extraordinary scenes. Truly extraordinary scenes. 11 minutes after 11 is the time. I've asked you so many questions about Boris Johnson over the years, and in many ways they all circle back to the same one. They all circle back to the same question, which in a way is, how does he get away with it? How does he get away with it? And I think I'm going to ask you that again. And I'm going to ask it of you in full knowledge that we don't know whether he's going to get away with it again. Hugo Keith is a much tougher inquisitor than Lindsay Flipping Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons. He's a much tougher inquisitor than any of the interviewers that Boris Johnson deigns to have his toes tickled by on a regular basis. He's a much tougher interviewer or scrutineer than the newspaper editors who have given him £500,000 a year to write columns or already published articles about why he's the real victim in this story. Philip Johnston in the Daily Telegraph today, writing an article before Boris Johnson has given a single syllable of evidence, claiming that Boris Johnson is the real victim of this. I'd love him to go and read that out to the COVID families assembled outside the inquiry. And remember, it was Daily Telegraph columnists and former editors that convened at the Garrick Club with Jacob Rees-Mogg and others to launch the Save Owen Paterson Society after another one of these charlatans was found to have breached parliamentary standards. Their response, of course, was not to advise their ally to accept the punishment that was coming his way, but to attempt to get him off the hook and rip up the rule book under which he'd been found to be guilty. And, of course, he'll never get questioned like this over at the BBC while the political editor remains a fully paid-up member of the Boris Johnson Admiration Society. So how does he get away with it? Andrew points out that factory resets obviously weren't covered in the technology lessons that Boris Johnson received from Jennifer Arcori. Again, it's a funny joke. It's a good line. But he was the Prime Minister. And everyone knew he was a liar. Is it all about that guy that rang in when Donald Trump was here? That I always remember saying, but you must know he's lying. Donald Trump was giving a speech in London about the size of the crowds outside the building he was in. And we had a camera outside the building he was in. We were looking at no crowds. And that simple juxtaposition of rhetorical claim by a politician with observable reality was chilling. It was spine-tingling. I can claim that there are huge crowds, the biggest crowds, the greatest crowds outside this building. And I said, well, how does it work? How does that happen? And someone rang me and said, I know he's a liar, but it really upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. And at the time I laughed. But maybe that's all there is. Maybe that's all there is. Maybe your life, and sorry, this is going to sound quite rude, but maybe your life is so weird and your personality so twisted that you find the frustration of people who care about the truth the closest you ever get to feeling joy. Is that it? Nadine Dorries watches Boris Johnson lie and claims that he's the most trustworthy person on the planet. What is wrong with her? It's not really a question about what's wrong with him. What's wrong with her? So, on we go. More to come. I'll remind you of some clips. I will introduce you to some more. We may see or hear from Charlotte Lynch again, who's keeping an even closer eye on proceedings than I am. But whatever transpires at this inquiry, or whatever emerges during these hours of evidence, I can tell you this. There will be a significant number of people who think that Boris Johnson has done nothing wrong, or that he is somehow the victim of another witch hunt. You remember? It was a witch hunt when he was caught banged to rights by a parliamentary committee containing a majority of Conservatives after even Chris Bryant had stepped down to avoid any accusations or allegations, false allegations really, of impartiality, but belt and braces. And they still called it a witch hunt. It would have been a witch hunt unless the committee consisted entirely of 14 Nadine Dorries clones. That's the only circumstances in which those people would have claimed that he could receive a fair trial. Where do you even begin today? Do you begin with the 5,000 WhatsApp messages that a man who was in charge of the nuclear code somehow doesn't understand and can't find? I don't know. So, what is your theory now? Because I don't think I've got one anymore. I watch him now and I feel something very new, very different to what I thought when he was in power. Because when he was in power, there is an urgency to the situation. There is a desperate need to share with the population the awfulness that they apparently can't see. How many times have I rather arrogantly described myself as the little boy in the crowd, screaming endlessly that the emperor is naked and being absolutely baffled by the failure of everybody around me to recognise the quivering buttocks in front of them. But it's not the right analogy, because everybody in the crowd knows that the emperor is naked. They've just been somehow persuaded to pretend that they can't see the nudity because the clever tailors had said that only clever people can see the clothes. So it doesn't quite work, the naked emperor analogy. Just now that he's not in power anymore, it's almost as if I've allowed the full horror of what he represents to bubble to the surface. It's now that he can't actually break anything. It's a retrospective reflection upon the abject awfulness of him. I mean, the unbelievable awfulness of this man. The things that he's done. You can begin with Brexit. The lies that he's told, the damage that he's done, the contempt in which he holds all the things we're raised to believe are important. Rules, obligations, standards, behaviours, fidelity, honesty, kindness, friendship, loyalty. All of these things we teach our children matter. And Boris Johnson teaches us that you can become the most powerful person in the country by treating all of those things with absolute contempt. How does he get away with it? And you can speak to me either as an admirer, if there is still such a thing, 0345 6060 973, someone from whose eyes the scales have fallen, because I kind of fell for his shtick when I wasn't really paying attention, but how anybody who's been paying even the vaguest attention for the last 7 years could still be falling for his shtick, I don't know. But I guess the more paid up a member you were of the Boris Johnson Appreciation Society, the more interesting your explanation of how he gets away with it will be now that you have finally seen the light. 0345 6060 973. Or like me, you can be someone who can chronicle in detail his corruption, his awfulness. You can chronicle it. You've got all the receipts, even before you bought my new book, which has a whole chapter on him and it didn't even touch the sides of his awfulness. Like me, you can chronicle his awfulness. You can detail his corruption and you still don't know how he got away with it. How did he get away with it? 0345 6060 973. It's 11:19. Let's have a little recap then. We'll start with Boris Johnson apologising. You'll remember Boris Johnson has actually apologised quite a few times. He spends an awful lot of time insisting that he's never going to apologise, and then he apologises for the pain and loss and suffering, but he's not apologising. Well, you have a listen to this.
Could I say, by your leave, that I understand the feelings of these victims and their families, and I am deeply sorry for the pain and the loss and the suffering of those victims and their families. And grateful though I am to the hundreds of thousands of healthcare workers and many other public servants and people in all walks of life who helped to protect our country throughout a dreadful pandemic, I do hope that this inquiry will help to get the answers to the very difficult questions that those victims and those families are rightly asking.
And then the question of personal responsibility.
Do you take responsibility for whatever my lady makes of the speed of the government's response in January, February, March of 2020?
Of course.
And the way in which the various moving parts of the government, the advisory committees, the departments, the agencies and so on responded?
Of course.
Do you take responsibility for the lockdown decisions, whichever way they went, and their timeliness, whatever my lady makes of them? The manner in which patients were discharged from hospitals into the care sector?
Of course.
The explosion of the virus within the residential care sector?
Yes.
The general speed at which the restrictions were eased?
Yes.
The Eat Out to Help Out scheme?
24 minutes after 11, and then doing a very classic Johnson tactic, which is denying the statistics or questioning the evidence that is in front of all of us.
Almost all other Western European countries had a lower level of excess death.
I've seen.
Italy was tragically in a worse position than the United Kingdom.
Well, I don't wish to contradict you, Mr. Keith, but the evidence, the ONS data I saw put us, I think, about 16th or 19th in a table of 33.
In Western Europe, we were one of the worst off, if not the second worst off. You must have long reflected since that time why that was so. Why do you think that we had the rate of excess deaths in this country that we did ultimately have?
As I say, I think that the statistics vary, and I think that every country struggled with a new pandemic, and I think the UK, from the evidence that I have seen, was well down the European table, and obviously even further down the the world table. If I had to answer why I think we face particular headwinds, I would say it was irrespective of government action. We have an elderly population, extremely elderly population. We do suffer, sadly, from lots of COVID-related comorbidities. And we are a very, very densely populated country, the second most densely populated country in Europe, and that did not help.
Remarkable, really, to go from world beating to claiming that 15th or 19th on a list of 33 is some sort of victory. And of course, deploying that Donald Trump tactic of essentially looking at graphs that have been put in front of them and denying that they're real or denying that they're accurate. And then the bit that you haven't heard yet involves Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, who's currently off sick and therefore unable to give evidence, including about the missing WhatsApps. But some WhatsApps are not missing, including the ones that Hugo Keith refers to here.
Is 48313, page 16. On the screen. These are communications between Mr. Cummings and yourself in May 2020. We're concerned with the bottom half of the page.
Sorry, can you expand it, because I can't?
Yes, 7th of May, Hancock is unfit for this job. The incompetence, the constant lies, the obsession with media bull. Reference to testing. You must ask him where we'll get to 500,000 per day, and where's your plan for testing? And if you can scroll back out.
But
just
sorry,
pause a second, Mr. Johnson. If you then scroll in, please, to the bottom half of the page, the last part. Mr. Cummings says, it'll certainly be a cock-up like everything else, but it'll be far from the worst of our cock-ups over the next 8 weeks. You need to think of binning Hancock, and so on and so forth. You cannot suggest that you are unaware of the opinion taken by your chief advisor over your Secretary of State for Health. You cannot suggest you are unaware of the concerns expressed by your Cabinet Secretary about the toxic reputation of your operation, because he WhatsApped you directly. You cannot suggest that there weren't grave concerns being expressed in Downing Street, that there were people who simply would not come and work for you because of the atmosphere you allowed to develop.
So, first of all, in politics, there's never a time when you're not, if you're Prime Minister, you are constantly being lobbied by somebody to sack somebody else. It's just what I'm afraid happens, and it's part of life. Everybody's constantly militating against some other individual for some reason of that right. It's just that I'm afraid that's the nature of it. It is perfectly true that this advisor in particular thought had a low opinion of the health secretary. I thought he was wrong. I stuck by the health secretary. I thought the health secretary worked very hard, and whatever, he may have had defects, but I thought that he was doing his best in very difficult circumstances, and I thought he was a good communicator.
Cummings there, not Case, my bad. We'll have a look at what Simon Case has had to say. So he's doing it. This is what I find so extraordinary. He's doing it. They're handing him receipts, and he is denying they exist. Here is proof that your senior advisor thought your secretary... I told you him and Hancock have got each other's back. I'll take that as an early win. Handed proof that the senior advisors and indeed the cabinet secretary, as we'll discover shortly, as we've already heard, thought that everything was absolutely awful. And he is doing what he always does. He is sitting there going, no, don't recognise that. No, not at all. No, this is normal. No, people are always... It's just not true. Everything he says is untrue. And yet the question of how the hell he gets away with it remains almost impossible to answer. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 11:34 is the time. Peter says he gets away with it because we let him. And his cronies get away with it because they're basically beyond the law. Tony on the Wirral, hate is a strong word and a strong emotion, James, but I can honestly say the visceral hatred I have for Johnson and all he stands for is palpable. Marcus in Derbyshire suggests he gets away with it because he validates people's prejudices. He got away with it because he's a crony, a member of that club that is protected by other cronies. And finally, Paul in Yorkshire, I absolutely share your anger and disgust at the man who has brought shame to this country and to the highest political role in our democracy. Thank you for expressing the deep emotions of many who wish for honesty and humanity in our land. It shouldn't be a lot. It's not a lot to ask for, is it? But here we are, and here he is, doing what he always does. 11:35 is the time, secure in the knowledge that in tomorrow's newspaper... How is the Daily Mail going to report honestly on Boris Johnson's testimony when they're paying him £500,000 a year to write a column? How is... I forget whether it's GBB's or the other one, where he's got a TV show. How are they going to report honestly on their colleague giving absolutely a ridiculous testimony? How do you think this WhatsApp story is going to get reported in, for example, the newspaper that's currently paying him £500,000 a year to write bilge about Barbie?
Do you know why your phone was missing those 5,000 odd WhatsApps?
I don't know the exact reason, but it looks as though it's something to do with the app going down and then coming up again, but somehow not automatically erasing all the things between that date when it went down and the moment when it was last backed up. So I can't give you the technical explanation, but that's the best I'm able to give.
I'm going to play that again shortly because it is impossible to exaggerate the arrogance and contempt you would need to have in place to even think about saying that in public. He might as well have said this. He might as well have literally said to Hugo Keith, I used to do daytime television, and I won't tell you who it was that told me it doesn't matter what you say. It's all about the rhythm with which you say it, particularly if the audience was elderly. So you could be sitting there saying something they completely disagreed with, but if you got your cadences correct, they'd all start cheering at the end. So you sort of go, I'll tell you something else about Thomas the Tank Engine. It might be written for children, but if you pay attention, then adults will love it too. Whey! And they all start clapping. I think you need to hear someone else's voice. Henry's in Stanton. Is it Stanton St John, Henry, or Stanton St John?
St John. Hi, morning, James.
Hello.
I just wanted to say firstly how ashamed I am this morning to be British, to hear this news and these poor frightened people who, you know, maybe I'm sure they won't be, but maybe.
You mean the immigration stuff?
Yeah. I just wanted to say that.
No, good on you.
It's absolutely shameful, and I'm a Conservative, but this is not Conservative behaviour.
Yeah, damn right.
And just going back to Boris,
yes. Johnson.
I remember when he came along, and I'm afraid I voted for him. I fell into that trap, and I remember hearing Max Hastings, the ex-editor of the Evening Standard, saying,
and the Telegraph,
yeah. Saying he was lazy, he had lots of, just saying he was an awful man. You do not vote for him. But I voted for him. I didn't want to vote for McConnell and the other guy.
No, sure.
And then the pandemic came along, and I remember just before the pandemic thinking, my God, there's going to be this amazing time where everything's going to be really great. And the pandemic came along, and I think we very quickly saw that Boris Johnson wasn't able to deal with governing. And I think it's a shame in a way that the pandemic did come along, because I think he would have been out on his ear much quicker had he had to do the normal day-to-day governing of a prime minister.
Oh, really? Oh, that's fascinating, because wow. I'm not so sure about that. God, it's nice to have a bit of a political conversation rather than just be sitting here marvelling at how bloody awful everything is. But I think that Cummings probably would have started enacting his grand plan if COVID hadn't come along, and Johnson would have carried on writing his Shakespeare biography while Dominic Cummings got on with the business of running the country.
I think the problem is he's a deeply lazy man. He lies at every opportunity. And but the awful thing is, and this pains me, he has got what he wants. He is now, compared to his peers, the Johnsons did not have the kind of money like the people that they played around with.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right.
And now he's earning an absolute fortune. He's having the most wonderful time. He's just bought a huge house around the corner from here. He's got exactly what he wanted, and he's laughing at us. And I think that's despicable. And
I want you to be wrong, and I'm conscious that I might now be contradicting you because I want you to be wrong so much. But I don't know that material success can actually sate the narcissistic needs of a man like Johnson. He needs to be revered. He needs to be admired. He needs to be honoured. And he isn't now. I think he's a broken shell.
He's a broken shell, and he'll never be honoured again. But I just think it's a great shame that we've had to go through this. And can I just finally say,
of course,
could we please look at paying our politicians properly? If we start
it's an interesting
paying
point. No, I don't think today's the day for this, Henry.
Okay.
Oh boy, I appreciate that you're probably looking at your own future career ambitions here. Hey, I'm not shouting you down. I probably agree with you. I'm just not sure that today is the day. And it's not. I do want to ask you one more thing. What was there a moment? Was it a gradual, incremental process that saw the scales fall from your eyes, or did they drop off in a single moment? May I ask?
I mean, I wasn't a fan of Brexit. I didn't vote to leave the EU. I'd love to be back in the EU. So that wasn't a great time. But I just think when he ignored the scientists and
he's just making it up,
making it up as he went along.
Go on, chaps. Tally ho, cross your fingers. We'll be fine. Let it run through the. Yeah, I mean, it was so obvious and so evident that one wonders why the entirety of the Conservative Parliamentary Party failed to notice. I've got the clip now of Hugo Keith asking Johnson about. I just want to tell you who Simon Case and Mark Sedwill were. Arguably, they are the most senior or the most important non-elected members of the Downing Street operation. So, well, actually, you'd have to add what's his chops Cummings to that list. So these are the people who were, succeeded each other essentially as cabinet secretary and head of the Home Civil Service. And they were exchanging messages with each other that Hugo Keith has just read to Boris Johnson.
Mr. Case refers at the top of the page to how you have told Mr. Cummings outright to stop talking to the media in his presence. This place is just insane, zero discipline. And then in the bottom half of the page, these people are so madly self-defeating. It's hard to ask people to march. It should be to the sound of gunfire. And then the Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary is the head of the civil service. Is he or she not? I've never seen a bunch of people less well equipped to run a country. That's not a matter of atmospherics or lobbying or part of the general day in, day out friction within government, is it?
Yes, I think it is. And I think that if you'd had the views of the Mandarinate about the Thatcher government in unexpurgated WhatsApps, milady, I think you would have found that they were pretty fruity. It's WhatsApp conversation is intended to be, though clearly it isn't, ephemeral. It tends to the pejorative and the hyperbolical. And I think that the worst vice, in my view, would have been to have had an operation where everybody was so deferential and so reluctant to make waves that they never expressed their opinion, they never challenged, and they never doubted. It was much more important to have a group of people who are willing to doubt themselves and to doubt each other. And I think that was creatively useful rather than the reverse.
I have never seen a bunch of people less well equipped to run a country. At this rate, Simon Case writes to his predecessor as Cabinet Secretary, I will struggle to last 6 months. These people are so mad, not poisonous towards me yet, but they are just madly self-defeating. And another bit that possibly didn't get fully conveyed in that clip is that they couldn't find good people to come in and help because the toxic atmosphere created by Dominic Cummings was putting everybody off. And Johnson, who's suddenly become an expert on WhatsApp in the space of 20 minutes, he's gone from not really knowing how it works and something about it rised up and servers came down and I lost 5,000 messages and whoops-a-daisy, to being a world authority on what people use WhatsApp for and why it's not to be trusted, why an exchange of confidences between a cabinet secretary and his immediate predecessor describing Boris Johnson and his colleagues as being mad and the worst, the least well-equipped bunch of people to run a country. Boris Johnson trying to dismiss it as what the kids call banter. It's almost as if we've learned absolutely bloody nothing. Also been shown Patrick Vallance's diary, which, remember, he was never expecting to see the light of day, the former chief scientific advisor, the last line of which reads, "This all feels like a complete lack of leadership." And Hugo Keith puts it, in all the coverage it says Keith. I keep thinking it's our Keith. The kid's usually wanging on in my ear about adverts and stuff, but the BBC coverage of this keeps saying Keith puts it to Johnson that it is extra. I think, what's Keith doing over there? What are you doing there, man? You've got a job to do here. It's extraordinary for the government's chief scientific advisor, alongside cabinet secretaries and other advisors, to be commenting negatively in this way about the PM. And he does this thing again. This is wholly to be expected, replies Johnson, as if it is normal for every single person in his inner circle. God, I am occasionally so close to swearing on the programme, and we never have we? There's occasional, we've never broken any rules. We've never sworn in a rule-breaking fashion, but there are words. There are words that I would like to use to describe Boris Johnson that would see me dragged off air in a heartbeat. There really are. This is wholly to be expected. Every single person in his inner circle, except Matt Hancock, thought that Boris Johnson was a complete... Better get the beep ready, Keith. You better get the beep ready. Boris Johnson was an absolute... Boris Johnson was a complete and utter... Everyone. Chief Scientific Advisor, Cabinet Secretary, Head of the Civil Service, Chief Advisor, everybody, Chief Medical Officer, everybody thought that Boris Johnson was absolutely awful. It's wholly to be expected, says Johnson. Changing collective understanding, something, science, blip. WhatsApps. I don't even know what the worst bit is. Listen to him talking about WhatsApp messages. And remember, if you still feel warm towards Boris Johnson, this is just how much contempt he has for you.
Do you know why your phone was missing those 5,000 odd WhatsApps?
I don't know the exact reason, but it looks as though it's something to do with the app going down and then coming up again, but somehow not automatically erasing all the things between that date when it went down and the moment when it was last backed up. So I can't give you the technical explanation, but that's the best I'm able to give.
11:51 is the time. PMQ's on the way. Anthony's in Hitchin. Probably either burst a blood vessel or fallen asleep, Anthony. You've been on hold for so long. What would you like to say?
It's more likely the former than the latter, James. I mean, I think for me, the key point is forget about the usual suspects, the Telegraph, et al. We know the bilge they're going to pump out. What really got me today was I looked at my phone and I had an alert.
Go on.
Pretty certain it was Sky News or BBC, but it was one of what you would class as more reliable. Boris Johnson plans to apologise. And I'm just thinking, wow, do you not realise you're probably subconsciously sort of rehabilitating that image of him, and
it's not subconscious, mate. It's not subconscious. Yeah, it's client journalism, and I don't think it would have been necessarily either of the outlets that you just alluded to. And if it was, they're reporting stuff that's been fed to the newspapers, and broadcasters should know better than to regurgitate stuff that's been dictated to newspapers. But sometimes the urgency of a newsroom atmosphere means that they fall into that trap as well.
Yeah, I think that was the main thing, really. I looked at it and I thought, really, if it was something that sort of come up from the usual suspects, then of course, they're going to.
Oh yeah, I take your point.
They're going to bat for him, but it just to me, and like you said earlier on, I mean, there's for me, that sums up the problem, because the extremes on either side are going to stick with that. But the average person in the street who perhaps isn't as engaged as what you are, or either side or in the middle of the tribe, they look at that and they think, it feeds that subconscious psyche, and they think, is he actually that bad? Or we've seen it. And that might be the only thing that, I mean, obviously it's a bit of a simplistic look at it, but I just looked at it, and the first thought that came into my head is, have you not seen the damage that man has caused to this country? And yet you're either consciously or subconsciously feeding that beast, and sort of taking us back into the time when, to be fair, I've got the old DVDs from Have I Got News For You. It was funny when he was a backbencher, but it was an absolute car crash. When he was in charge. I thought you
just overstepped the swear word mark then, but car crashes are fully acceptable turn of phrase to use at this point. And I guess it happens, the higher up the ladder he climbs, the more inappropriate he becomes for the positions that he's in, and the harder it is for people who've helped him get there to turn around and acknowledge that he never should have got there in the first place. It's increasingly fascinating. I mean, because the media you refer to, at the time, there was a sort of Boris Johnson fan club in the country. The 2019 election result would be the peak of it. A lot of it was a sort of repulsion towards being repelled by Jeremy Corbyn. A lot of it was linked to the idea, I think even those of us who knew that Brexit was going to be an unmitigated disaster were quite keen for it to happen by then, so we could get on with the business of proving ourselves right and beginning the very slow process of undoing all the damage that it would do. So get Brexit done was even an effective policy. And then probably the third factor on that was a personal popularity of Boris Johnson, a sort of clubbability. But and that was the peak of it. That was the peak of it just then. And the speed of that decline among the public seems to me to be spectacular, and yet the Conservative Party membership and the newspaper editors are pretty much the only people left in the fan club. That's the bit I don't quite get. Why can't they see what we see?
There's no comment, but I mean, if ever there was an example of, never again should the choice be at the ballot box between two people who permanently look like they spent the night in a skip, that's it, really, isn't it?
I'm not going to go on pot kettle on personal appearance, Anthony. You, as a very dapper gentleman, you're perfectly entitled to, but it was more the content of the electoral offer than necessarily the sartorial presentations that troubled me. Thank you, mate. Take care. And James in Nottingham. James, last word on the eternal question of how.
Yeah, good morning, James. I think perhaps you're being a tiny bit disingenuous if you haven't come up with an idea yourself that could cover how he gets away with it. It's usually, in my experience, it's fear or corruption or a little bit of both. Or somebody. I
think the question. I don't think I'm being disingenuous, because the question for me, it constantly evolves, and you answer it up to a point, but then you get to the next point, and he's still getting away with it. The reason why it's an interesting question today is because we don't know if he is going to get away with it again. Although, given the slavish support he'll receive from the newspapers, he probably will. But the question becomes interesting again and again and again with every new iteration of his awfulness, I believe.
Yeah, I agree with you that he might not get away with it. So he's been getting away with it, and we don't know how he's been doing that. Yeah. But somebody must be assisting him somewhere. Or if the world is just a lot more weird than I ever thought it was, and it doesn't make sense, and we don't know how, and it's just some sort of magical act that he is getting away with it. I think the thing that he believes is, like a lot of the school children I used to teach when I was a teacher in classrooms, it's not cheating unless you get caught. I think he's definitely got that. And then once you need evidence. I mean, it's like if you're being gaslighted by somebody, you need to get the evidence, show it to them, and then show it to a third party who can agree with you and say, yes, it's not you, it's them.
Yeah, but even if you do that, he'll say that's not evidence. He's done it today.
Yeah, that's the baffling one. When he's and then I'm going to choose to believe
him. So here is. I always think of him as being like Billy Bunter with pie juice smeared all over his face, and he is insisting he has not eaten a pie. And you cannot cut him open and show people the pie. That's when, at one point, I think it was Doris who even said, well, you don't know what was going on inside Boris Johnson's head when he was lying to the House of Commons. You can't prove that he knew he was lying. And that level of cultish devotion is, I think, quite possible. I wonder whether we should speak to it's a bit late now, actually. We should have had this idea about a year and a half ago. Speak to an actual cult deprogrammer about Boris Johnson and why someone like Nadine Dorries remains so committed to the belief that the world's going to end at 2:10 on Tuesday. What do you do on Wednesday morning? I guess it never comes, does it? I know the world will end. Actually, I made a mistake. It's going to be next Tuesday or the one after that or the one after that. Boris Johnson, a man more sinned against than sinning. Can't remember the last time that politics watchers have to drag their eyes away from something that's arguably more interesting than PMQs to start contemplating an imminent PMQs. But Natasha Clark is here to help us do precisely that.
We're trying.
Yes. Do you want to talk about Johnson or do we wade straight in on PMQs?
We can go straight on PMQs.
What do you think is going to happen? Bearing in mind that Keir Starmer, by your analysis, and it was shared by many, had his finest ever outing last
I will stick by
Wednesday.
that.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people
right.
agreed with us last week that he had a really good session. So really, he can only fall from grace from here, can't he? It only is down.
So it could be even better. It could than the last one. You can have two bests in a row, as we prove every day on this radio programme.
Sure.
So what do we think is going to come up?
I am obviously wondering what's going to come up, but I've been, as you know, have had my head in the COVID inquiry today. I wonder if Keir Starmer will mention anything from the inquiry. We've also had a London shooting overnight and a very sad news about stabbing in Abbot. I wonder if Keir Starmer might bring those up. Rishi Sunak will obviously want to hail his migration partnership, which James cleverly signed yesterday.
Where is there any clear blue water between the Tories and Labour on migration? Because Starmer has been mildly critical of the Rwanda scheme, but he has been, to the dismay of many traditional Labour supporters, he's been pretty much in lockstep with the Tories on the problematic nature of immigration per se and in general or the current figures. It's only really the Scottish National Party that are prepared to stand up and remind everybody that without immigration at the levels it's been at for many of the recent years, the country would be in all sorts of trouble.
True, and I think Keir Starmer will say that he will cancel that Rwanda policy. That's his clear blue water between the Labour Party and the Conservatives. That's what he will argue. But yes, I think what we will probably get into is a little bit of the detail of these migration announcements that we've seen in the last couple of days. And will Sir Keir Starmer come out and defend those salary thresholds, because we know that is becoming quite a contentious topic. People saying that we should not be pricing people out of love, not allowing people to come to the UK to come and live here if they don't earn a certain amount of money. If the person that they want to be with cannot earn that is essentially separating families. And I think there'll be a lot of pressure on the Labour benches for Sir Keir Starmer to vote down some of these migration measures if they do come to a vote, and essentially to stand up for that. So I wonder whether Keir Starmer might mention that today at PMQs.
I mean, I suppose most people would accept the need for some figure, some sort of threshold, and 18,000 you could possibly argue was too low, even as you argue that 38,700 is too high, or at least that the leap from one to the other involving a 20 grand hike overnight is unfair and too quick. Yesterday, Natasha, I don't know why, from a place of naivety or idealism, I just thought they can't possibly be intending these policies to apply to people who are already here.
No, they won't.
But the Independent reported that they do, that when you reapply for a visa, this threshold will actually kick in, and that you may have your visa reapplication, your visa renewal application rejected in the event of the household income being lower than £38,700. You know this lot much better than I do. I can't see them actually ordering removals of parents of British children, even though technically they've given themselves the right to do that.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics about whether it will apply when you reapply for your visa
They've said it will.
or not. I think in terms of whether you've got a permanent residency in the UK, what kind of visa you're on, I'm sure all of those things will probably have an impact. But yes, obviously when you're making a new application for a new visa, that is potentially will come into effect. But these rules haven't come in yet. They're not coming in until the spring.
The spring of 2024.
Yeah.
So the lad getting married in February needs to crack on and get all his paperwork in place. And I'm saying that genuinely and with a sense of urgency. Get a crack on with the marriage. Get all your paperwork in place. Get it sorted by the end of February, and you'll be golden until renewal time comes around. I
actually wonder. I know no politicians I've heard have made this case yet. Whether we will see a rush of people trying to beat that deadline when it does come. We don't have a date for it coming in yet. But if they do, will we see a rush of people trying to make it here and try and circumvent those rules? I'm sure we will.
We'll jump over to the House of Commons as soon as Keir Starmer gets to his feet. We're pretty much up in the air on what is likely to come up today. Last week, the week before last, took us completely by surprise. So we'll watch with interest. And the COVID-19 inquiry continues to unfold. On the immigration stuff, which, for good or for ill, is dominating political discourse once again, if these policies are, quote, successful, end quotes, and the numbers come down in the hundreds of thousands, the statistics won't be published until after the next general election, will they?
Yep.
So
I don't usually agree with Suella Braverman, but she did make this point yesterday that actually...
Well, it's not an opinion.
No,
let's not get carried away. Suella Braverman hasn't suddenly discovered a power of insight. It's just counting.
For sure, but she did raise it. She was the first person that came and mentioned the fact that we will not see the impact of any of these migration figures until after the next election. So her argument being, well, I wanted to do this a year ago and I was told I can't. So, yes, we will not be seeing it. I think it goes back to the question of trust, right? Do you trust the Conservatives are going to bring down the numbers? Because they haven't done so far. They've just gone up and up and up. And I think going into an election saying, trust us, we're going to do things differently right now after 13 years is a pretty big ask for many people.
14 by the time they go into the election, yeah. And a lot of people wondering what actually happened at the COVID inquiry when Lady Hallett asked people to leave. It was COVID families holding up plain pieces of paper simply saying that the dead can't hear your apology, and having refused to sit down, they were led out. So just filling in some of the gaps in the coverage of the COVID inquiry today. We've got an astonishing scene just briefly on the television when I'm watching. I've got Sky News on in the background, and they've got a split screen. They've got Boris Johnson giving evidence at the COVID inquiry, and they just had Michael Fabricant on his feet in the House of Commons on the same screen. That was quite a surreal little moment. It turns out they're not sharing the same wig. They are actually both in possession of independent hair.
Have you ever seen them in the same room?
No, I've seen them on the same screen now. That's the closest it will come, I think, to ever seeing them in the same room. We're now at the part of our Wednesday afternoon contemplations where we are waiting for Keir Starmer to get to his feet and pretending that we've got interesting things to say in the meantime. Go on then.
I have many interesting things
Pretend
to say.
that you've got something interesting to say. How many people do you think will be watching PMQs today compared to usual, as opposed to continuing to watch Boris Johnson?
Well, I'm interested to see whether Sky News stick with this or they swap over to PMQs. What's your bet against?
They're trying to do both, aren't they, at the moment?
You can't do both in terms of the audio, can they?
They'll cross over. They'll cross over when it starts, because for good or for ill, the COVID inquiry is rear-view mirror stuff, whereas the PMQs is very much of the moment.
Quite a lot of people watching that stream of the COVID inquiry today, about 15,000 people when I was last on it.
And they're taking rather longer than usual to get going at PMQs. I don't know why that is, just presumably parliamentary business. Maybe a little bit of a logjam. Everyone was stuck in the lobby, stuck in the canteen watching the telly.
Yeah, or stuck on a train strikes day today. So it's been a hell of a morning for me to get in.
You can, of course, follow the COVID inquiry live on our sister station, LBC News. So you won't be taking PMQs in its entirety there. We will take the relevant bits here that generally involves Keir Starmer's questions, Rishi Sunak's answers, and then the contributions from Stephen Flynn, the Westminster leader of the SNP, and Sunak's responses to that. But there is a sort of curious dichotomy in political coverage at the moment, with 50% of attention still being focused on events at the COVID inquiry and 50% of attention sort of focused on the House of Commons waiting for PMQs to get underway. If your life depended on it, what will the first question be about?
For Keir Starmer?
Yeah. It doesn't, don't worry. Your life doesn't depend on it, but if it did.
I think if I were him, I would go with, we've seen more stabbings, we've seen more shootings. This shocking. Isn't this a symptom of Tory Britain?
7 minutes after 12, we shall see. This is remarkable, actually. I don't know. Have we missed it? Have we got the wrong screen up?
No, Rishi's just
going on the rebellion because the backbenchers, the Tory backbenchers.
He did that last week, didn't he? He did all 6 questions on migration. Are you going to do that again? Well, he could do.
But there's actual clear disagreement, isn't there, over the European Convention on Human Rights?
Conservatives
with about 100 Tories absolutely adamant we shouldn't ditch it, and about 100 Tories absolutely adamant that we should.
Yeah, tearing themselves apart over migration. What's new in the Conservative Party? But yes, there is this row going on about exactly how far this emergency legislation on Rwanda will go. We're expecting it tomorrow, but we're hearing it might come as early as this afternoon now.
The legislation?
Mm-hmm. So they've clearly made some sort of decision. The Prime Minister has clearly taken a stance, and it sounds like he has gone for what MPs are calling the semi-skimmed version, which is not quite as hardline as some Conservative MPs on the right of the party would like to see. It probably will mean a carve-out in terms of the law on the Human Rights Act, but it will not include a carve-out on the law on the European Convention of Human Rights, which some MPs were really pushing for. That seems to be the dividing line between most Conservative MPs at the moment.
Which means the Supreme Court could well send it back again.
I completely agree. And I just think there's no way of getting around it unless you do this extreme option. Which
and here is Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's very good to see you in your place, and we wish the Speaker a speedy recovery. This week we lost 2 giants of the Labour family, and I thank the Prime Minister for his comments. Alistair Darling was a man of unassuming intelligence, warmth and kindness. He brought a calm expertise and, in private, a cutting wit, and his love of his family was ever present. Our thoughts are with Maggie, his wife, Callum, Anna, who he loved so dearly. Glenys Kinnock was a passionate campaigner for social justice who changed lives home and abroad. She was a loving and supportive partner and mother, and her death is a huge loss to all of us. We are thinking of Neil, of Stephen, Rachel, and of all the family. Can I also echo the Prime Minister's comments in relation to Lord Douglas Hamilton and in relation to the Hillsborough families? They deserve justice. In a previous capacity, I worked with the families. They waited a very, very long time for the findings, thanks to people in this House, and they've waited a long time for this response, but I'm glad it is now coming. Madam Deputy Speaker, if the purpose of the Rwanda gimmick was to solve a political headache of the Tories' own making, to get people out of the country who they simply couldn't deal with, then it's been a resounding success. After all, they've managed to send 3 Home Secretaries there, an achievement for which the whole country can be grateful. So, apart from members of his own cabinet, how many people has the Prime Minister sent to Rwanda?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've been clear before, we will do everything it takes. Mr. Speaker, we will do everything it takes to get this scheme working so that we can indeed stop the boats. And that's why this week we have signed a new legally binding treaty with Rwanda, which together with new legislation will address all the concerns that have been raised, because everyone should be in no doubt about our absolute commitment to stop the boats and get flights off. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, and this is the crucial point that the Honourable Gentleman doesn't understand, deterrence is critical. Even the National Crime Agency have said that you need an effective removals and deterrence agreement if you truly want to break the cycle of tragedy that we see. But what we heard this morning from his own ministers was that they would scrap the scheme even when it is operational and working. As again, once again, Mr. Speaker, once again, instead of being on the side of the British people, he finds himself on the side of the people smugglers.
Madam Deputy Speaker, when they first announced this gimmick, they claimed Rwanda would settle tens of thousands of people. Then the Deputy former Prime Minister quickly whittled it down to mere hundreds. Then the Court of Appeal in June made clear there's housing for just 100. The current number of people sent there remains stubbornly consistent Zero. At the same time, Madam Deputy, Article 19 of the treaty says the parties shall make arrangements for the United Kingdom to resettle a portion of Rwanda's most vulnerable refugees in the United Kingdom. So how many refugees from Rwanda will be coming here to the UK under the treaty?
Mr. Speaker, what? Madam Deputy Speaker, sorry.
Order! Prime Minister.
It addresses all the concerns of the Supreme Court. But it's a point of pride, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we are a compassionate country that does welcome people from around the world. But let me just get the honourable gentleman up to speed on what we are doing. Reduce the number of illegal arrivals from Albania by 90%. Increase the number of illegal working raids by 50%. Because of all the action, we've taken the number of small boat arrivals down by a third, Madam Deputy Speaker. But what is the honourable gentleman's plan? Because it comes down to he just simply doesn't have a plan to address this problem. But no, I'm probably being unfair because he does have a plan. It's to cook up a deal with the EU that would see us accept 100,000 illegal migrants.
Keir Starmer. Migration's trebled on his watch, and all he can do is make up numbers about the Labour Party. It's really pitiful. I'm not actually sure the Prime Minister can have read this thing. Article 4 says the scheme is capped at Rwanda's capacity. That's 100. Article 5 says Rwanda can turn them away if they want. Article 19 says we actually have to take refugees from Rwanda. How much did this fantastic deal cost us?
Prime Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Home Secretary was crystal clear about, there is no incremental money. There is no incremental money that has been provided. This about is ensuring that the concerns of the Supreme Court have all been addressed in a legally binding treaty that will allow us to operationalise the scheme. But I'm glad he raised the topic of legal migration, which I agree is absolutely far too high, Madam Deputy Speaker. That's why this week we've outlined a plan bigger than any other government before to reduce the levels of legal migration by £300. It's an incredibly comprehensive plan. So if he cares so much about it, the simple question for him is, does he support the plan?
Madam Deputy Speaker, he clearly hasn't read it. Annex A says on top of the 140 million he's already showered on Rwanda, when we send people there under this treaty, we have to pay for their accommodation and their upkeep for 5 years. And that's not all. This morning, a government minister admitted that anyone we send to Rwanda who commits a crime can be returned to us. I'm beginning to see why the Home Secretary said the Rwanda scheme is something to do with bats, I think, wasn't it? What does he first think attracted Mr. Kagame to hundreds of millions of pounds for nothing in return?
Listen, I've slightly lost the thread of the question, Madam Deputy Speaker. But the simple point is, there's a simple question here. If you believe in stopping the boats, as we on this side of the House do, you need to have an effective deterrence and returns agreement. It's as simple as that. The honourable gentleman is not interested in stopping the boats, which is why he's not interested in the Rwanda plan. In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, we know that they don't want to tackle this issue because even when this government was trying to deport foreign national offenders out of this country, they opposed it. Multiple members of his shadow front bench all signed a letter to me to that effect. But I don't need to tell him that because he signed it too.
Okay, that's enough. Sir Keir Starmer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would say that this treaty's got more holes in than a Swiss cheese, but I don't want to wind up the Prime Minister by talking about a European country again. Madam Deputy Speaker, you have to give credit to the Rwandan government. They saw this Prime Minister coming a mile off. You can only imagine their delight, their sheer disbelief, when having already banked £140 million of British taxpayer money without housing a single asylum seeker, the Prime Minister appears again with another offer they can't refuse. A gimmick that will send taxpayers' money to Rwanda, refugees from Rwanda to Britain, and won't stop the boats. There was mention of Margaret Thatcher earlier. How, Madam Deputy Speaker,
there's understandable excitement about the mention of May, but the House must listen to the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer.
Party go from up yours to laws to take our money, Kigami.
Mr. Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, when it comes to this European thing and Margaret Thatcher, this is the week that the Shadow Foreign Secretary, I think, didn't rule out rejoining the European Union. He can role-play Margaret Thatcher all he wants, but when it comes to Europe, his answer's the same. Yes, yes, yes!
Madam Deputy Speaker, forget the private jet. He's obviously on a private planet of his own. But as Daily Mail readers learned this week that the Prime Minister has begun to feel sorry for himself. He's even been heard comparing his plight to his beloved Southampton Football Club. I do think that's a bit harsh because Saints have been on an 11-game unbeaten run, while, as the song has it, the Prime Minister gets battered everywhere he goes. But if you want the perfect example of how badly the Tories have broken the asylum system, last week the Home Office admitted that 17,000 people in the asylum system...
Order! Come on. Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you. If you want the perfect example of how badly they've broken the asylum system, Madam Deputy Speaker, last week the Home Office admitted that 17,000 people in the asylum system have disappeared. Their exact words, it's hard to believe this, we don't think we know where all these people are. Now, you might lose your car keys, you might lose your headphones, you might lose your marbles. How do you lose 17,000 people?
Prime Minister!
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I mean, on the topic of football teams, he used to describe this Rwanda policy as immoral, and yet his football team has a Visit Rwanda badge on the side of them. But in the week when he made his big economy speech, we're still waiting to hear how he's going to borrow £28 billion and still cut taxes and reduce debt. It's same old thing. The sums don't add up. But while they're struggling with their calculator, we're getting on and delivering. A new treaty with Rwanda, the toughest ever measures to cut legal migration, our schools marching up the tables, and tax cuts for millions, Madam Deputy Speaker. So whether it's controlling our borders or lowering our taxes, just like the Saints, the Conservatives are marching on.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm getting fed up with sitting in traffic jams in my constituency caused by contractors digging up roads, involving lane closures and temporary traffic lights, often invoking utility company emergency powers that turn out not to be emergencies, and often with no sign of anybody doing any work, particularly over weekends. So I set up a campaign to name and shame these inconsiderate contractors. But it turns out that when they cause all this chaos, when they breach the rules of their permit, the maximum penalty is an £80 fixed penalty notice. So will the Prime Minister back my campaign and support better enforcement and realistic levels of fine?
Well, my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and that's why we've set aside £8 billion as a result of our plans on HS2, Madam Deputy Speaker, which is enough to resurface over 5,000 miles of road to improve journeys, a cornerstone of our plan. But also, we are introducing a range of measures, as the Honourable Gentleman says, to reduce congestion from roadworks. Contained in the plan for drivers is a scheme for greater fines and penalties to ensure that works do finish on time, and I'll make sure that we look at his suggestion, and I wholeheartedly back his campaign.
Leader of the Scottish Nationalists, Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Is the Prime Minister worried that he is projected to be the first Conservative Party leader to lose a general election to a fellow Thatcherite?
We really must hear the Prime Minister, and we've got a lot of questions to get through. It's not the Prime Minister's opponents who are giving him trouble. Prime Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I say to the Honourable Gentleman, Margaret Thatcher's view was cut inflation, then cut taxes, and then win an election, and that's very much my plan.
Of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not just in relation to Margaret Thatcher where the Tory and Labour leader appear to agree. The same is true of the government's latest migration policies. Now, for those of us on these benches, we aren't afraid to say that we believe migration is a good thing. It enriches our communities, it enriches our economy, it enriches our universities, our schools, our health service, and of course, our care sector. So in that regard, can I ask the Prime Minister, why does he think it is acceptable to ask people to come to these shores to care for our family members whilst we show complete disregard for theirs? What has become of this place?
Well, Madam Speaker, it's completely wrong. No, as we've already said, we have a proud track record of welcoming those who are most vulnerable around the world. Over 500,000 over the past few years from Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Hong Kong and elsewhere, and that's what this country will always do. But at the same time, when it comes to economic migration and other forms, it's absolutely right that we take strong action to curb the levels that we have seen because they are simply far too high and place unsustainable pressure on our public services. And Madam Speaker, I make no apology for saying that, or indeed saying that it is important that those who come here contribute to our public services.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I first of all welcome the government's significant funding increase for 2-year-olds preschooling in 2023.
24 minutes after 12, and PMQs reaches conclusion again. I'll just run through some of your thoughts on it, and then we'll talk to Natasha about hers. I did think that, actually, James in Tunbridge Wells. You spoke, they listened, the Cones hotline is back. What a question. Obviously nothing else going on. That question, James, in Tunbridge Wells, as you well know, is a gimme. Quite a few of you picking up on that. I resurrected the ghost of the Cones hotline yesterday. And whoever that obscure backbencher was complaining to Rishi Sunak about traffic jams seems to have brought it back into play again today. Ian in Wolverhampton also picking up on that. Let's have a look. I just threw coffee everywhere, laughing at Sunak's plan, writes Joe, to win the election. Yet more mess from this Tory government. A bit of bants while the country crashes and burns. Brilliant. Starmer missed an open goal there with things you may lose. He should have mentioned an Oyster card. Reference there to Susan Hall, one of the most harrowing victims of crime that this country has ever witnessed. I didn't think it was possible, says Ian in Brentford, but Starmer was even better this week. Forensic and cutting. Sunak was pathetic. Sunak and his Tory cronies were an absolute joke, and unfortunately none of us are laughing. That's the end of my highbrow analysis. I'm fairly sure I'm right about this, says Gus, but I don't think I've heard it commented on. Sunak appears to forget each week that Starmer is right honourable, not just honourable. Is that true? Is he right honourable?
Yes, he's a Privy Councillor.
I heard him say right honourable, but maybe he did. Gary in Darlington says Sunak's like John Major, but without the charisma, which I think is a comment that works on several levels. And Matt picking up on something that I'm inclined to agree with. Sunak looks like he's had enough of the whole situation. He seems to be defeated. And Sunak looks more like Pitt the Younger from Blackadder every week, says Guy in Torquay. Quite a few people picking up on the Cones hotline as well. Love the show, James, but PMQs has become an embarrassing part of our government. These are supposed to be our brightest and best. I can't believe the behaviour. Other countries must think we are beyond saving. You'd be surprised, actually. I forget what country it was in, but there's routinely actual fist fights in some parliaments. Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, is with me. He went in hard on Rwanda and he went in quite effectively. Really.
He did. It was really good. I think another stunning outing for Keir Starmer there, wasn't it? You said it wasn't going to be better than last week. I think it was.
Do you? No, I said it might be. You said it wasn't.
No, I said it wouldn't be.
How dare you rewrite history?
No, I said you said that, that it was going to be better, that it could be better,
yes,
and it was. So I'm just telling you that you're right. I thought you might appreciate that.
We get used to that.
I thought it was better than last week. His strategy of really making lots of terrible dad jokes, but actually it does work, and then intersecting that with some quite dissecting of this Rwanda plan, really ripping it to pieces, and kind of not focusing on the overall overarching theme of migration, but just going forensically in on this is why it's rubbish, this is why it doesn't work, this is how much money it's going to cost. I think that really worked for him today.
Staying away from the moral dimension of it as well, which is, almost the essence of Keir Starmer, isn't it? Pragmatism, really, ahead of anything else, because if you stay away from the moral dimension, you don't have to really, apart from Sunak reminding him at the end that he did once call it immoral, there's a change in tactic there, because now he's just focusing on the inefficacy of it and the cost and the small print, and the small print is terrible for the Foreign Secretary and for the Prime Minister, up to and including a senior Rwandan politician on the telly yesterday, I think talking to ITV News, talking to Paul Brand, saying there's nothing in the new document that wasn't in the old one.
Sure, there's a lot of good detail in there that we did go through yesterday, which is now getting ripped apart, yes. However, including the idea that criminals, we were told yesterday on a Home Office briefing, will be taken back to the UK.
If you get deported to Rwanda and commit a crime,
go to jail for 5 years, you can get brought back to the UK afterwards, and then redeported somewhere else apparently after that.
Yeah, that was Chris Philp, who, it's fair to say,
got into knots in that.
Doesn't really cover himself in glory whenever he steps outside.
No, but yes, I think it makes it easy for Keir Starmer, doesn't it, when these deals are so full of holes. We're taking some migrants back from Rwanda as well, according to the deal that Rishi Sunak and the Rwandan government signed just yesterday. There's lots to go on, isn't there? That, £140 million we've spent on this partnership. Yeah. We know there's going to be spent more money. James Cleverly did admit yesterday that more money is going to be spent sending it to Rwanda to prop up the details for this treaty. We don't know how much yet. They're being very tight-lipped about it. But yes, more money being thrown away, possibly down the drain for a system that might never get up and running ever again.
That's the money that's gone to Paul Kagame regime, of course. But Peter Gagan, who applies his trade now largely independently, I really heartily recommend his Democracy for Sale Substack, previously, of course, at Open Democracy. Peter's put in an FOI, I think, on some of the costs. So they might have sent 140 million quid to Rwanda itself, but they spent £2.1 million fighting legal challenges to the policy here at home. Last month's doomed Supreme Court case alone cost almost £300,000. So there's plenty of money around.
Think about how many tax cuts that could have
How many nurses,
for.
Natasha?
How many teachers'
How many
salaries
nurses that could have paid
provided.
for? Someone will be doing the calculation as we speak. Does the Europe stuff work? Because I tell you, that was an interesting moment. So he didn't reach for the emergency Corbyn button, obviously, and he hasn't now for 4 weeks by my reckoning.
I think you're right.
So I think they've established that doesn't work anymore. It probably does him more harm than good, because all Starmer has to do is stand up and say, I threw him out of the party.
He's not here anymore, mate.
He's not here anymore, but he does still think that by saying, ooh, Europe, that might cause Starmer problems. But Starmer came back on that with probably his weakest joke, actually, about Swiss cheese and not wanting to upset the Prime Minister by mentioning a European country. I don't know that that there's any toxicity attached anymore to Rishi Sunak suggesting that Keir Starmer feels rather more warm towards Europe than Rishi Sunak does.
I think there is a bit, and there is a bit of Keir Starmer is the guy that campaigned and under Jeremy Corbyn for us, to have a closer relationship with the EU and to rejoin it. And that's the guy. And does he still hold those views or not? And those are legitimate questions that people will be asking Sir Keir Starmer ahead of the next election. So I think the Tories obviously have very few emergency buttons to push, and that is one of them.
Yeah, and it's a weak one, even if it's mildly effective. Final question, and we need to be brief. I've just noticed the time. What's happened the last 2 weeks, do you think? Has Starmer got new people around him? Has he changed his diet?
He's clearly stepped up, hasn't he? He's had his Weetabix and he's, more dad jokes, preparing me ready for Christmas. But it's working, isn't it? I think all of them are ready for a bit of a break. There's lots of raucous shouting across the chamber. Eleanor Lang telling everyone to calm down a bit.
I prefer her to Lindsay Hoyle. I think she does. I don't want to hear too much of the Speaker or the Deputy Speaker at PMQs, and she I think does a bang up job. But do we know, has he got new people with him? Or
I do know there are a few people I do know that have moved into Sir Keir Starmer's team recently, so I'm definitely going to be messaging them and saying well done. The PMQs are sounding a lot better, but yes, not sure on that one, but it does seem like he's sharpened up his act. He's really going on stuff that he knows is very forensic and peppering a couple of good jokes in for good measure.
Natasha Clark, many thanks indeed. I'm going to talk to Ruth. We're going to talk to Brenda Doherty after the news, whose mum was the first woman to die with COVID in Northern Ireland. She now co-leads the Northern Ireland branch of the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice group. And after we've met Brenda, we will probably be catching up with what's unfolded at that inquiry during that evidence from Boris Johnson, while we have been concerning ourselves with the current Prime Minister's weekly questions. But before all of that, Lottie Morley has your headlines. 12:36 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The earlier moments of Boris Johnson's testimony, somewhat disrupted by members of the Bereaved COVID Families group standing up, making a silent protest. I'm not sure that Lady Hale had much choice but to order their removal, but it was a very mannered and silent protest, simply involving holding up pieces of paper which collectively read that the dead can't hear your apologies. It's a very poignant phrase, one that no doubt resonated with Brenda Doherty, whose mum Ruth Burke was 82 years old when she became one of the first people, I think the first woman to die with COVID in Northern Ireland. And Brenda now leads the Northern Ireland branch of the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice group. Brenda, I think you've been watching events here in London with other members of your group. Let's begin with what you were hoping to see during the first hours of Boris Johnson's testimony, and then we'll wonder whether you've seen it.
Hi, James. I just want to make a wee correction there. Just that actually it was the Friends of the Wall that stood up with the banners.
Indeed it was.
These
No,
are
you're
all,
absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
They're volunteers and they're the ones who stood up today with their posters. Yes, so I've been watching quite frustratingly actually the inquiry today. I haven't heard Mr. Johnson take ownership of any real feelings other than the fact that he probably didn't coordinate well with the devolved administrations, which, as being somebody who lives in the devolved administration, I know that anyway. But, the apology that he gave, should I say, at this moment in time means nothing to me. I want to hear over the next 2 days, does he actually take ownership of the mistakes that he as the leader, as well as some of his government advisors, have made?
I wonder whether he's even going to acknowledge that they were actual mistakes, as opposed to inevitable consequences of the urgency of the situation, or some such phrase that he'll no doubt come out with.
Well, no doubt he probably will come out of something like that. I mean, one of the questions he was asked this morning, I was a bit flabbergasted when I heard his response, because what he said was so far as I paid attention. Now, I just think that's scandalous.
Yeah.
I don't have a job like Mr. Johnson, but my job's a very responsible one. And I certainly pay attention to anything that is brought to me that is going to affect the families that I work with. So I just couldn't believe that he actually uttered that sentence. That could have been actually a case of when his brain wasn't in gear but his mouth opened, which unfortunately I think happens quite regularly with Mr. Johnson.
And possibly saying things, as you suggest, out loud that he would, if he was normal, he'd later regret saying, but him being him, he'll either gloss over it or pretend that he never said it in the first place. I'm going to phrase this question carefully, Brenda, because I don't want to come across as insensitive, but I'm not. There's nothing can bring your mum back, can it? So what are you looking for from the inquiry in general and Johnson in particular?
Well, first of all, I'll answer this. What we need from Mr. Johnson is candour. And it's a bit unfortunate that the Liverpool law wasn't passed, because that would have been an opportunity to make sure that candour happened.
Just remind my listeners what element of the Hillsborough law it would be that
the automatic, that we wouldn't have to campaign for an inquiry, that the honesty and openness would be there, so that would be vital. And you're right, my mum's gone. We will never have those final 12 hours that Mummy had on her own. Mr. Johnson made his lockdown speech. I got a phone call to say that Mummy was going to die. I don't want anybody ever to be in that position again. I don't want people to be locked out of care homes for months on end, to have to stand out in the rain. So this is about learning lessons to save lives. That's what we've always said from the start of the campaign. Learn lessons to save lives. And people will talk about the cost of the campaign, but I'm afraid the human cost that we paid can't happen again. There was, unfortunately, money misspent, which I'm sure will come out in future modules. And that will also be something that needs to be addressed, so that when we do, and we will have a pandemic in the future, that we are far better prepared. So it's about, I want my mum's, I didn't know anything about 1918, so I didn't, Spanish flu. I want to make sure that future generations know that we did our utmost to make sure that lessons were learned from this pandemic.
You seem to be more concerned by the preparation for future pandemics than perhaps even the current government is.
Well, that's because the current government, there is toxicity, which has been referred to by most witnesses, which is very, very, I suppose I walked around in my normal life before pre-pandemic in a bubble. That bubble was well and truly burst in March 2020. I've had to read things like the Civil Contingency Act. I'm finding out that, civil servants were removed from preparing for a pandemic to go on to a Brexit, no deal Brexit. These are things that I never thought I would need to know. And one of the big things that really concerns me is how we can have leaders who think it's okay. Mr. Johnson, again, referred to some of the WhatsApp messages as being sort of normal.
Yes.
I'm afraid if anybody sent WhatsApp messages like that where I'm employed, there would be disciplinary and investigation and sacked.
That's a very good point, and also presumably where you work, the most senior people in the organisation routinely lose 5,000 messages without knowing where they've ended up or whether they can ever be retrieved.
Oh, I'm actually wondering, is Mr. Johnson menopausal? I am, but I have never done anything that is that tragic. No, I'm sorry, that wasn't even a good cover-up. I'm afraid, and this is the problem that I have with Mr. Johnson, and I'm really nice calling him Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
I think that he does a lot of waffling. And unfortunately, sometimes that takes away from the actual subject and the questions that he's being asked, and then we don't get to answers. So what I need from the inquiry and what I need from Mr. Keith is to keep pushing him and not let him off and not let him bumble. This is an opportunity for us to actually get to the bottom of it. And one of the things I want to be very clear about,
yes,
this is not about the personalities in the government. And I think somewhere along the line we can get lost in that. But I think what it does show is that the personalities that you have in government impacts on the decision making.
Clearly.
And I think that's what's got lost during the whole management of the pandemic.
Just to step back from today's events, you've obviously been following events in general very closely, the whole inquiry very closely. I mean, what words would you use to describe your thoughts at the moment? Are you encouraged by the direction of traffic, by what's come out so far, by the way that the inquiry has been conducted?
Well, there's sort of twofold. One, yes, I'm really glad that Lady Hallett pushed for the WhatsApps, and I do believe that on one level she is in a very difficult position. She's not going to be pleasing all the people all the time.
For sure.
But the thing for us as a campaign group, I've had the privilege of being at the inquiry. I have had the privilege of telling my mum's story. And that would be the direction I would like to see. I would like to see more core participants called to give evidence, because that's what brings the human cost. the human cost of those who've lost their lives, the human cost to those who are still suffering from long COVID, which Mr. Johnson dismissed.
Yes, he did.
And unfortunately, I think the thing is too that over years to come, people who have had COVID and are suffering consequences, their health is going to deteriorate. And these are the sorts of people that unfortunately under Mr. Johnson's lead were left very vulnerable.
And the sorts of people that under Mr. Sunak's lead are being increasingly sort of shouted at to return to work. Before you go, Brett, I wasn't expecting you to bring up Spanish flu. And you certainly wouldn't have been expecting the question I'm about to ask you. But my colleague Lewis Goodall's been looking at this and looking at how across the world, in a way, there was a sense of the population wanting to move on as quickly as possible. And that entails not learning lessons, not perhaps taking the lessons from the 1918 pandemic and using them to prepare for the next one. How do we guard against that happening now? Because you clearly do not suffer from the desire to move on and file it all away and leave the trauma somewhere in a box. You're clear-eyed about the need to learn these lessons. How do we spread that sense?
I think one of the things is we have to make sure that history reflects the reality of COVID. And I think that is very important. So we need to look at education. I mean, I'm involved with another project here in Northern Ireland called Memory Stones of Love. And one of the things that we are doing at this moment in time is looking at how we can ensure that people's stories are and experiences are told, and that they are then included some way in the curriculum. Myself and my co-founder are hoping to go round and be part of the education. We've linked in with Caru's bereavement services, and I think that's what's vital. It's important. I know people want to move on.
Yeah.
The thing is, I will never move on. I will move forward. My mummy will always be with me in my heart. She's my driving force. That's why I'm here. She was a feisty wee woman. I'm her daughter. But I think the thing is too, we have to realise that in order to help us to move forward, we need to see changes being made. We need to see that society is not left vulnerable the way they were in 2020.
Yes. I hope you'll allow me to say that your mum would be very proud of you, Brenda.
Now, don't you make me cry. I have to go and do a TV. My mum. Wee Ruthie Babes is what we called her, and she was our wee. My mummy lost her son when she was 26, when he was 16 in 1984, and she showed us the value of life. So that's why I'm here, because I value life.
Well, thank you for showing us. Brenda Doherty.
Thank you very much for having me on. Thank you.
God bless and good luck to you as well.
Thank you very much.
In all that you're doing. It's 12:47. Mentioned earlier the question from Hugo Keith Casey about Boris Johnson's failure to attend Cobra meetings. There's going to be a lot to pick over, and we won't have spotted all of it in the first instance. Charlotte Lynch will have been paying more attention than we have, but I think it is worth just having a little listen to this.
Didn't the seriousness of the position in late January make itself plain to you? How could there have been a need for a Cobra every week for 5 weeks in relation to an issue that didn't require your direct involvement as the Prime Minister?
I think for the reason you've given, which is that a Cobra is a regular occurrence in government when there's something that a particular government department is leading on. In this case, it was health. The possibility of a coronavirus pandemic, which was only declared by the WHO on the 12th of March, was not something that had yet been, hadn't really broken upon the political world, certainly in my consciousness, as something of real potential, a real potential national disaster. And in that period, end of January, beginning of February, it's not much in the political world. I wasn't asked about it, for instance, at all at PMQs.
Is that true? I wasn't asked, because I know Labour, as long ago as April of 2020, were accusing him of being missing in action during the crucial weeks when the virus first arrived in the UK. Michael Gove sent out to repel the story, but it was on Sophie Ridge's Sunday show on Sky News that he conceded Johnson had indeed missed 5 meetings of the government's Cobra Emergency Committee. Charlotte Lynch has joined me. essentially trying there to claim that not attending Cobra meetings, 5 consecutive Cobra meetings at the outset of the pandemic, or what became the pandemic, was just normal behaviour, business as usual.
He just wasn't asked about it at PMQs, so it didn't really cross his mind. I think the premise of that question, though, from Hugo Keith KC was...
Sadiq Khan was asking us about it on this programme at the time, actually, because he wasn't invited either.
And he was making the case that he should have been. And again, that the very fact that 5 Cobra meetings were held, 1 a week, over the space of 5 weeks. That was the premise of the question of from Hugo Keith KC, essentially saying, did it not alarm you that actually such an amount of Cobra meetings were being held about this thing that you just didn't attend? In fact, it was up until the 26th of February. There was one held on the 26th of February that the Prime Minister didn't attend either. And he told the inquiry that he just didn't twig, and he should have twigged much sooner about how serious COVID was. He accepted, and he's repeatedly accepted, that his mindset in, he said, January to mid-February, but it appears what's being argued and presented to him in evidence is actually right up until the end of February. He was not as alarmed as he should have been. He hadn't woken up to the threat that this virus was posing. Now, he said he began to realise after seeing footage from Italy, he said that it rattled him. But more messages were put to him about, to what extent really that did wake him up, or what threat he was seeing, because there were some messages presented to him that had been sent from Dominic Cummings in a WhatsApp group with him and Sir Edward Lister, who was the Downing Street Chief of Staff at the time, where Dominic Cummings said on the 6th of February, we need a briefing on Cobra tomorrow. He was told it was probably out of control already and would sweep the world. Now, he called it a major comms exercise, emphasis on comms rather than health. Right. And Sir Edward Lister, who was the Downing Street Chief of Staff, said, Dom is right, the comms is key. Boris Johnson responded to that by saying, yes, we need to talk coronavirus comms at 9. So Hugo Keith KC then went in with questioning about the type of threat that he was most concerned about.
Why was there a focus, by way of the singular response to that information, on comms? Why didn't any of you say, well, if this virus is probably out of control now and will sweep the world, why did none of you say, we need to take steps now to deal with infection control, prevent the spread, alert the population, we have a major problem, not focusing on communications?
Because I think that it's your point about the infection rate, fatality rate, the consequences. I think that when you read that an Asiatic pandemic is about to sweep the world, you think you've heard it before, and that was the problem. And so I say we need to talk about it. But I think it would be fair to say that the scientific community within Whitehall at that stage was not telling us that I was not being informed that this was something that was going to require urgent and immediate action.
But you knew,
and I think that although you're right that we could see the mathematical implications of the reasonable worst case scenario, I think the problem was that we didn't think, and this was our mistake, we didn't think that the RWCS was very likely to happen. That was the problem.
Now, we know that Boris Johnson then did chair his first Cobra meeting relating to COVID on the 3rd of March, 2020.
That was very big of him. I think we can all agree. Well done, Boris, turning up for a Cobra meeting. I hope someone gave him a biscuit.
Yeah, that was 3rd of March, 2020. But we know there was a cabinet meeting on the 28th of February, where again they went down a similar line of questioning because, again, rather than talking about the health threats of the virus, it seemed that Boris Johnson was warning of the dangers of overreaction.
Strategy. When are we going to take big decisions? Of what evidence? On what evidence? Of what evidence? And then you say biggest damage done by overreaction. So it looks from the face of this note that your sense that there was a real crisis, that you were extremely rattled, is prevalent in the first sentence. But in the second sentence, perhaps in reflection of the CCS report, you say the biggest damage is done by overreaction.
I think I'm leaving both possibilities open because that's how it still struck me. I think that in disasters such as this, the actions that government take inevitably also have costs, and I'm sure we're going to come on to this, but that's the balance you have to strike.
As the Prime Minister, instead of directing government to respond to the threat of a near existential crisis, you instead warned of the dangers of overreaction.
No, I say no. That's, well, forgive me. I say, when are we going to take some decisions, and on what evidence? Because I'm looking at a problem that's been presented to me. I need to know what the plan is going to be. I've told you that I don't like the look of the way it's going in Italy at all, and we need to do something.
It's nearly 1 o'clock. I can't take any more. Luckily, Sheila Fogarty is going to take over now, although Charlotte Lynch has to return, no doubt, to this particularly pungent cold. It's called a microphone, Shields.
What is wrong with me lately?
It's for talking
I've been hitting microphones.
What it's not is a punch bag.
Headbutting
a little mini punch bag. Yeah. You can catch up on all of today's show, yada yada boom, on Global Player. You're always in control. Download it for free from globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now. 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 With you now.